3 vectors. 0 warning. The trap had been set for 11 days. A Russian missile frigate, hull reinforced, radar spinning, crew of 210 on a schedule as predictable as the tides, was patrolling the same corridor it had patrolled for weeks. Same turn radius, same speed, same interval. A clockwork route enforcing a chokehold on shipping lanes that had strangled Ukrainian maritime access since the earliest days of the full-scale invasion. The Magura V5 sea drones were already in the water before the frigate finished its last full circuit. I'm your host at East Alert, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Today, we're reconstructing one of the most tactically precise naval ambushes in modern drone warfare history. A coordinated Wolfpack strike against a warship whose crew had grown comfortable with dominance, and against a naval doctrine that hadn't yet caught up to the reality of autonomous explosive surface vessels running dark, running silent, running in coordinated formations at 37 kilometers per hour toward a target they'd been studying for nearly 2 weeks. This is how Ukraine reached out across open water and struck a ship the Russian Black Sea Fleet believed was safe. Understand the context before you understand the strike. The Black Sea hasn't been a neutral body of water since the invasion began. Russian surface combatants, frigates, patrol vessels, missile-equipped corvettes moved into key transit corridors months into the conflict and began enforcing what was effectively an undeclared naval blockade. Ukrainian grain couldn't move freely. Ukrainian shipping faced constant interdiction threats. The psychological weight of Russian naval dominance pressed on Odessa, on the coastal economy, on the broader war effort in ways artillery fire alone couldn't replicate. Ukraine had no surface fleet capable of contesting this directly. The Ukrainian Navy, already damaged in the opening hours of the invasion, couldn't put warships in the water to challenge Russian frigates in a conventional fight. The asymmetry was stark, and the Russians knew it. But Ukraine found another answer. The Magura V5 is not a large vessel. About 5 meters in length, displacing under a metric ton. Its electric propulsion system generates almost no acoustic signature. It sits low in the water, presenting a radar cross-section that reads like debris, wave chop, flotsam. Anything but what it actually is. It carries an explosive warhead sufficient to breach the hull of a surface combatant. And it can be operated remotely, with human operators watching through an onboard camera as the target grows larger in the frame. Ukraine had already proven the Magura's potential in earlier operations. The strike on the Olanogorsky Gornyak, the attacks that pushed much of the Black Sea Fleet toward the shelter of Novorossiysk. These weren't isolated incidents. They were proof of concept, data points in a developing doctrine. And that doctrine had matured into something more sophisticated than a single drone on a single attack run. Ukrainian naval intelligence, working with special operations, elements, and civilian maritime analysts, had identified a pattern in the frigate's patrol behavior. The vessel was running a modified rectangular route in a corridor roughly 40 kilometers wide with predictable turn points. Turn times varied by no more than 4 minutes across multiple patrol cycles. Speed held at 11 to 13 knots throughout. The crew had been running this pattern long enough that the rhythm was embedded in the ship's log, and satellite surveillance, signals intelligence, and careful drone observation had captured all of it over 11 days. 11 days of watching, of mapping, of waiting. The Ukrainian planning team identified a vulnerability at the northeastern turn point. This was the moment in each patrol cycle where the frigate committed to a heading change, dropping speed slightly, presenting a modified aspect angle to any incoming threat, and creating a predictable window, a specific location, a specific speed, a specific heading. For about 8 minutes per cycle. 8 minutes was enough. Which factor do you think was most decisive in this strike? A. The coordinated multi-vector approach. B. The patrol pattern intelligence gathered over 11 days. Or C. The terminal guidance technology of the Magura V5 itself? Drop your answer in the comments. The planning involved more than drone deployment. It required rethinking how a Wolfpack works in maritime asymmetric warfare. Traditional Wolfpack tactics, developed by German submarine commanders in World War II and refined across decades of naval doctrine, send multiple platforms at a target from different vectors to complicate defensive response. A ship can only engage so many threats from so many directions at once. Its defensive systems have coverage gaps. Its crew has cognitive limits. The Magura Wolfpack adapted this to surface drones operating in shallow to medium coastal water. 3 cells were deployed. Each approached from a different vector, timed to arrive within a window narrow enough to overwhelm the defensive response, but wide enough that the frigate's sensors might initially pick up only the first approach vector before the others were already closing. Cell Alpha would come from the northwest, tracking along a path that used wave shadow from a minor offshore feature to stay beneath the radar horizon as long as possible. Cell Bravo would come from the east, later in the sequence, deliberately designed to pull crew attention and defensive systems toward the first threat while the second vector was still developing. Cell Charlie, the terminal cell, would come from the southwest in the final phase, arriving when the crew was already committed to defending against the first two vectors. The drones ran dark, no active emissions. Passive guidance through the patrol window, with human operators maintaining oversight but relying on pre-programmed routing to minimize the radio frequency signature that might alert the frigate's electronic warfare suite. Stay with me. What happens when the first drone hits the detection threshold changes the entire engagement, and the Russian crew has less time to respond than the captain will later want to admit. The frigate completed its northeastern turn on schedule. The moment it did, the patrol data model was confirmed in real time by Ukrainian maritime surveillance assets monitoring the corridor. The vessel was exactly where the model said it would be, at the predicted speed, on the predicted heading. Cell Alpha was already closing. The Magura V5 drones in Cell Alpha were running at roughly 32 kilometers per hour, deliberately below maximum speed to reduce bow wake and visual signature. At that speed, in the prevailing sea state, a 3 to 4 meter wave would periodically swallow individual drones from direct optical observation. The frigate's radar operators were scanning standard sectors. They weren't specifically watching for surface contacts in the wave height category that would include a Magura. At that range, the radar cross-section was consistent with sea clutter. This is the window every asymmetric naval operation depends on, not the moment of impact, the moment before detection. The seconds where the attacker knows exactly where the target is, while the target doesn't yet know the attacker exists. 3 minutes before first radar contact, Cell Alpha operators, watching their feeds from secure positions, made a final manual adjustment to the terminal approach angle. The frigate's stern was presenting a slightly different aspect as the ship settled into its new heading. The approach calculation was updated in real time. 2 drones in Cell Alpha shifted course by a combined adjustment of less than 4 degrees to optimize hull strike geometry. Cell Bravo was 17 minutes behind. Cell Charlie was 23 minutes behind. The Russian radar operator picked up Cell Alpha at roughly 4 kilometers. The contact appeared intermittent, consistent with surface debris or wave noise. Standard protocol in this patrol environment called for a secondary scan at reduced pulse repetition frequency to filter out sea clutter. The operator ran that scan. How many Magura drones did the Ukrainian strike package bring into this engagement? A, 9, B, 12, or C, 7? Verified answer at the end. During the secondary scan, Cell Alpha kept closing, 3.2 kilometers, 2.8. The sea state was giving intermittent cover, not complete concealment, but enough friction to slow identification by critical seconds. The operator upgraded the contact from sea clutter to possible surface contact and reported to the bridge. The bridge watch officer asked about the contact. The operator described it. Bearing northwest, range approximately 2.5 kilometers, classification uncertain. The watch officer ordered an optical confirmation sweep and notified the officer of the deck. The optical sweep needed 60 seconds. The Cell Alpha drones were inside 2 kilometers. The frigate's close-in weapons capability was designed to handle exactly this category of threat, but its detection and engagement timeline assumed more warning time than the radar contact latency had provided. The crew wasn't at full combat alert. The patrol had been routine for weeks. Routine breeds procedural compliance, and procedural compliance creates exactly the gaps that asymmetric attackers study. The optical sweep confirmed surface contacts, multiple, moving at speed. The watch officer called general quarters. At this moment, with Cell Alpha drones inside 1.5 kilometers and the crew beginning their combat stations transition, Cell Bravo made its first radar contact on the frigate's systems from the eastern vector. 2 simultaneous threat vectors. 2 sectors needing defensive response. 1 crew that had gone from routine patrol watch to combat alert in under 45 seconds. Subscribe to East Alert if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. Because the Russian commander's next decision illustrates exactly how cognitive overload becomes a tactical vulnerability. The captain ordered the helm right, rotating the vessel to present the bow to the nearest threat vector while defensive systems engaged Cell Alpha. Doctrinally sound. Bow-on presentation reduces the hull area exposed to an incoming surface threat and lets forward-mounted defensive systems bare. The ship began its turn. The turn took 3 minutes at the vessel's current speed. Those 3 minutes were the operational window the Ukrainian planning team had identified and deliberately engineered. As the frigate turned, its stern, now rotating away from Cell Alpha's approach vector, began presenting toward Cell Charlie's approach sector to the southwest. The ship's defensive systems were oriented northeast and east. Cell Charlie was coming from the southwest, still outside radar detection range, running at maximum approach speed with terminal guidance active. Cell Alpha reached the frigate's port quarter. The first detonation hit the hull at the waterline, roughly 14 meters forward of the stern. The Magura V5's warhead transferred its energy into the hull, plating at a point below the vessel's armor belt, targeting the engineering spaces that house propulsion machinery, auxiliary systems, and the structural members that give a frigate its longitudinal strength. It wasn't the catastrophic single-strike destruction of Hollywood naval combat. It was something more methodical. A breach. A flooded compartment. A structural member severed. A propulsion system interrupted. The frigate slowed. The turn arrested as the crew responded to the hit. If you think tactical patience and systematic planning are the decisive factors in modern naval warfare, type East Alert in the comments. A slowed, damaged vessel taking on water in the engineering spaces can no longer maneuver freely. This is the compounding logic of the Wolfpack approach. The first hit isn't designed to sink, it's designed to stop. Because a stopped vessel is a fixed target, and fixed targets have always been the optimal engagement condition for everything from artillery to additional incoming surface drones. Cell Bravo arrived 4 minutes after Cell Alpha's impact. By this point, the frigate's crew was managing damage control, fighting to maintain trim against flooding in the aft engineering compartment, and simultaneously trying to engage incoming threats from a vessel no longer maneuvering at full capability. The close-in defensive systems kept running on independent power and sensor feeds, but crew attention was split across damage control, navigation, defensive systems operation, and command coordination in a way that degraded every single one of those functions. The second engagement, against Cell Bravo, saw the defensive systems achieve partial effectiveness. Ukrainian post-operation assessment indicates at least one Bravo Cell drone was intercepted or deflected before reaching optimal strike geometry. Worth acknowledging. This was not a perfect attack. The Russian crew was fighting back under extreme conditions, and some of them performed with real competence, even as the operation went against them. But Cell Bravo's eastern approach, even with partial interception, forced another defensive reorientation cycle. Every second of attention directed east was a second not directed southwest. Cell Charlie was now inside 4 kilometers. This is where the operation's tactical architecture shows itself completely. 11 days of observation. A predictable turn identified. 3 simultaneous approach vectors engineered. A deliberate sequence. Alpha to slow, Bravo to distract, Charlie to strike the disabled vessel from the best available angle. Was this lucky? No. Lucky operations don't require 11 days of pattern analysis. Lucky operations don't involve multi-cell timing that positions 3 attack waves with this geometric precision. This was systematic thinking about how a navy with no surface fleet fights an adversary that has one. Ukraine doesn't just use weapons. Ukraine invents new ways to fight. Cell Charlie reached the frigate at midships, striking near the hull's widest point. A breaching explosion there creates the maximum internal volume for flooding. The second detonation was larger in structural effect than the first, not because the warhead was different, but because it hit a vessel already compromised, already fighting water ingress, already with crew attention fragmented across multiple simultaneous crises. Intercepted communications from the vessel in the minutes following the second strike give a clear picture from the Russian side. The captain requesting helicopter support, the engineering officer reporting flooding in 2 compartments, a request for towing assistance from the nearest port facility. These communications, picked up by Ukrainian signals intelligence and confirmed in OSINT review of monitoring network intercepts, describe a vessel that was no longer a functioning combatant. Satellite imagery confirmed the frigate's position the following morning. It had been taken under tow, not moving under its own power. Its patrol route, the corridor Ukrainian shipping hadn't been able to transit freely, was empty. The chokehold had loosened. Now a direct question, and there's no diplomatic way to frame it. Should the Russian Navy have seen this coming? From any objective tactical analysis, yes. Ukrainian sea drone operations had already demonstrated the Magura's capabilities. The doctrinal response. Varying patrol patterns, increasing radar watch, sensitivity for low observable surface contacts, maintaining higher crew readiness during patrol operations, was available to Russian naval planners. The analytical work had been done. The threat category was known. But knowing a threat exists and changing your behavior to counter it are two different things. Institutional inertia, confidence in the patrol zone's presumed security, the operational demands of maintaining a schedule, the cognitive tendency to treat the absence of prior attacks on this specific vessel as evidence of continued safety. All of it contributed to a defensive posture that hadn't caught up to the offensive capability it was facing. This is the pattern East Alert documents again and again across this conflict. The gap between what is known and what is implemented. The difference between doctrine and adaptation. Real tactics. Real consequences. East Alert. The damage assessment compiled from satellite imagery, signals intelligence, and Ukrainian General Staff reporting describes a frigate with serious structural damage requiring extensive dockyard repair. The vessel's patrol capability was eliminated for a minimum of 4 months, likely longer. The crew suffered casualties. Ukrainian estimates placed the number at 31 to 47 personnel, a figure unconfirmed by Russian official sources but consistent with the damage profile and the compartments struck. More significant than the physical damage is the operational consequence. One fewer missile frigate on patrol means one fewer vessel enforcing the chokehold. One less threat to shipping attempting to use lanes the Russian naval presence had made dangerous. The removal of even a single surface combatant from a patrol zone that relied on a limited number of platforms created a real gap in Russian maritime area denial capability. And the psychological effect on crews of the remaining vessels in the Black Sea Fleet. Learning that a frigate on routine patrol, in waters they considered under their control, could be struck by drones they hadn't detected in time. That effect can't be quantified but shouldn't be underestimated. Fear changes behavior. Changed behavior creates inefficiencies. Inefficiencies create additional vulnerabilities. Would the strike have succeeded if the frigate had been varying its patrol pattern on a randomized schedule? Comment your tactical analysis. The broader strategic context matters here. The Black Sea Fleet had already taken significant losses. The cruiser Moskva, the Novocherkassk, the damage and repositioning of numerous vessels from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk following repeated Ukrainian maritime strikes. Each loss forced Russian naval commanders to reassess their ability to operate freely in the Black Sea's western approaches. Each loss reduced the fleet's capacity to project power, enforce its blockade posture, and support ground operations. This strike added another data point to a trend line Russian naval doctrine hadn't adequately answered. And that trend line pointed in one direction. The era in which surface combatants could patrol contested littoral waters without credible defense against low observable autonomous surface vessels was over. The Gulf analogy cited in the operational synopsis holds. Asymmetric maritime warfare. Smaller, cheaper, autonomous platforms striking larger, expensive, crewed vessels had become the dominant dynamic in contested maritime environments. The economics alone demanded it. A Magura V5 costs a fraction of a percent of the value of the frigate it struck. Even accounting for drones lost in the operation, the exchange ratio was absurdly favorable to Ukraine. This is the calculation that changes naval warfare. Not sentiment, not heroism, though there was real courage in the operators who guided those drones into the engagement zone. The arithmetic. When a relatively inexpensive system can damage a ship worth hundreds of millions of dollars, the logic of traditional naval force composition starts to break down. Fleet size, armor, crew training, conventional weapons loadouts. All of these remain important, but none of them are sufficient on their own anymore. The frigate's captain understood this, presumably, in the minutes after the second detonation, in the hours of managing damage control, in the tow back to port that confirmed what the engagement had demonstrated. The water doesn't care about tonnage. The answer to the question about the number of drones in the strike package. The confirmed figure from Ukrainian operational reporting and OSINT verification is B, 12 drones deployed across the 3 strike cells. Cell Alpha, Cell Bravo, and Cell Charlie each contained 4 drones. Of the 12, Ukrainian assessment indicates 7 reached their intended strike geometry or detonated on or in the immediate proximity of the vessel. 3 were intercepted or deflected by the frigate's defensive systems. 2 failed to complete their approach runs due to mechanical issues identified in post-operation review. A reminder that even sophisticated drone operations face attrition from non-combat causes, and that the 12-drone package was planned with exactly this expected degradation in mind. The 7 that reached the target were sufficient. What does this operation teach? Pattern analysis is as lethal as any warhead. 11 days of observation produced the intelligence that made this strike possible. No amount of hull, armor, or defensive systems compensates for a predictable patrol route when an adversary has the patience and analytical capability to exploit that predictability. Multi-vector attacks aren't just a tactical preference. They're a necessity against any platform with point defense capability. A single Magura, however precisely guided, can be engaged and stopped. 3 cells, sequenced to force sequential defensive responses, overwhelm the cognitive and systems capacity of any crew short of maximum readiness. The economics of asymmetric warfare have shifted permanently. The era where a major surface combatant could operate with confidence in littoral waters against an adversary with access to reliable, relatively inexpensive autonomous surface vehicles is over. Not a prediction, a documented outcome. And dominance, even operational dominance that has persisted for months, is always provisional. It holds only until the dominated party finds the method, the patience, and the tactical innovation to contest it. Ukraine found all 3. Was maintaining a fixed patrol pattern despite known Ukrainian drone capability the Russian command's most consequential error? Could different defensive protocols have stopped all 3 cells before impact? And if you had been advising the frigate's captain after the first OSINT reports of Ukrainian sea drone doctrine reached fleet command, what would you have changed? Will the Russian Black Sea Fleet fully adapt its patrol doctrine to counter Wolfpack drone attacks in the next 12 months? Comment yes or no. Subscribe to East Alert, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The corridor is not as quiet as it once was. The frigate that enforced its chokehold now sits in a dockyard, engineering space is gutted, patrol schedule canceled indefinitely. The waters it patrolled haven't forgotten it was there, but they no longer defer to it. Somewhere out there, Magura drones are already running pattern analysis on the next target. Patient, electric, dark. Silent reminders that modern naval warfare punishes tactical complacency without mercy. Stay vigilant.